You know what's funny? How everyone acts like wanting more from life makes you the bad guy. I'm Courtney, 29, and apparently I'm the wife who destroyed a perfectly good marriage because I had the audacity to be honest about what I actually needed. Curtis and I were together 6 years, married for 3, and honestly, those last couple years felt like I was slowly suffocating. Look, I love Curtis. Loved him. Whatever. But some people are just built different, and I've always needed more excitement, more connection, more everything than what our little suburban routine could offer. Curtis is the type who gets genuinely thrilled about organizing the garage on Saturday mornings. Meanwhile, I'm dying inside from the predictability of it all. So, yeah, I started bringing up the idea of opening things up. Not out of nowhere, I'd been dropping hints for literally years. During those quiet moments after sex when he was all relaxed and actually listening, I'd mention articles about successful open marriages or ask what he thought about couples who had arrangements. His standard response was always, "I haven't really thought about it." Which honestly started pissing me off. How do you not think about these things? How do you just accept that this is it forever? The more I brought it up, the more I realized Curtis was just limited. He's been wearing the same style clothes since college, gets coffee from the identical place every morning, watches the same 3 shows on repeat. It's like he stopped growing as a person the day we said, "I do." Meanwhile, I'm still evolving, still discovering parts of myself, still wanting to experience everything life has to offer, instead of just existing in this beige bubble of routine. About a year ago, we took this trip to some mountain town that looked perfect in photos. Curtis had researched every restaurant and activity, creating this detailed itinerary that sucked all spontaneity out of what was supposed to be an adventure. But whatever, I was happy to be somewhere different, away from our normal cycle of work, dinner, TV, bed, repeat. The first day was actually decent. We hiked, tried local food, and Curtis seemed more relaxed than usual. I caught myself thinking maybe this would work. Maybe being away from home would help him understand what I'd been trying to explain about needing more excitement. For a few hours, I felt hopeful about having those serious conversations I'd been waiting years to have. That evening, we ended up at this bar with live music. Exactly the kind of place Curtis usually avoids because it's too unpredictable for his taste. But he was making an effort, which I appreciated. We found a table, ordered drinks, and for the first time in forever, it felt like we were actually on a date instead of just going through married people motions. That's when we met Adrien. He was at the bar alone, and when our eyes met, there was this immediate spark I hadn't felt in years. Not just attraction, though he was definitely attractive, but this recognition, like meeting someone who actually got what it meant to be alive. He had this magnetic energy that was the complete opposite of Curtis's careful, measured approach to everything. Adrien joined our table after buying us drinks. He was charming and funny and told these amazing stories about traveling and actual adventures, not the safe, predictable trips Curtis preferred. Between us, within an hour of talking to Adrien, I felt more intellectually stimulated than I had in months of conversations with my own husband. Curtis was being polite, but I could see that familiar tension in his shoulders when he felt out of his element. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. Adrien asked real questions about my thoughts and opinions, not just going through conversation motions. He was curious about my perspective, wanted to know what I found interesting, actually seemed to value what I had to say. It was intoxicating. As the night progressed, I found myself gravitating toward Adrien. Our conversation became this bubble Curtis wasn't really part of, which felt natural, because Adrien and I just clicked. We talked about books and music, and places we wanted to travel, and I kept thinking, this is what's been missing. This is what I've been trying to explain about needing more than domestic routine. I could feel myself flirting with Adrien, and more importantly, I could feel him flirting back. There was electricity between us that I hadn't experienced since before Curtis and I got married. It reminded me what attraction was supposed to feel like. Butterflies, time flying by, that feeling I'd almost forgotten existed. Curtis kept trying to insert himself into our conversation, but it felt forced and awkward. He'd make technically relevant comments that somehow killed the mood every time. Like when Adrien told this hilarious story about getting lost abroad, Curtis chimed in with practical advice about travel insurance, completely missing why the story was entertaining. I started feeling genuinely annoyed with Curtis for being such a buzzkill. Here I was, finally connecting with someone who understood embracing life's possibilities, and my husband was sitting there being his usual overly cautious self. It was embarrassing. Adrien probably thought I was married to the most boring man alive, which wasn't entirely wrong. Walking back to our hotel, Curtis was unusually quiet. I could tell he was processing something, probably overthinking the entire evening like he does with everything. Part of me wanted to talk about what happened, maybe use it as an opening to finally discuss things I'd been trying to bring up for years. But another part just wanted to hold on to that feeling of connection without Curtis analyzing it to death. The next morning, Curtis was acting weird. Not angry exactly, but this careful politeness I recognized as his conflict avoidance mode. He suggested sticking to our original plans instead of meeting Adrien again like we'd discussed. When I asked why, he gave me this look like I should already know, which just irritated me more. "I thought we came here to spend time together," he said, which felt like a guilt trip. Like I wasn't allowed to enjoy meeting new people just because we were married. It was exactly the possessive behavior that made me feel suffocated. Here I was, finally feeling energized about something, and Curtis wanted to shut it down because it didn't fit his narrow trip expectations. We ended up compromising and meeting Adrien for lunch, but Curtis was obviously uncomfortable the whole time. Every time Adrien and I started having a good conversation, Curtis would interrupt with comments about afternoon plans or suggest we should get going. It was like having a chaperone instead of a husband. After lunch, Curtis practically dragged me away, claiming we had reservations somewhere that I knew we didn't. I was mortified by his behavior and frustrated that he was ruining what could have been fun. When I confronted him back at the hotel, he accused me of being inappropriate with Adrien. "You were flirting with him right in front of me," Curtis said with this wounded tone. I found both annoying and unfair. So what if I was flirting a little? It's called being social and charming. Just because Curtis forgot how to be spontaneous doesn't mean I should turn off my personality too. The fight escalated from there, with Curtis acting like I'd committed major betrayal by enjoying another man's company. He kept saying how disrespected he felt, how uncomfortable it made him, how inappropriate it was for a married woman to behave that way. Like listening to someone from the 1950s lecture me about proper wife behavior. What really got to me was how Curtis made everything about himself. Instead of being happy that I was feeling more like myself than I had in years, he focused entirely on his own discomfort. It was selfish and controlling, and made me realize how much I'd been suppressing my natural personality to accommodate his need for everything to be safe and predictable. The rest of the trip was basically ruined. Curtis sulked and gave me silent treatment while I was annoyed that he'd turned what should have been fun into drama about his feelings. We barely spoke during the drive home, and I spent most of it thinking about how different things could have been if I'd married someone more confident and secure. About a month after we got back, I finally worked up courage for the conversation I'd been avoiding. I chose a quiet evening when Curtis seemed relaxed, thinking it would be easier for him to really hear what I was saying. "I want to talk about opening our relationship," I said, watching his expression carefully. I could see him processing the words, that familiar look of someone trying to figure out if they'd heard correctly. It wasn't entirely surprising. I'd been dropping hints for years, but hearing it stated plainly still caught him off guard. Curtis was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically see wheels turning. He asked what exactly I meant, so I explained that I thought we should explore seeing other people while staying married. Not divorce, not separation, just acknowledging that monogamy might not be realistic for everyone. His first reaction was asking if this was about Adrien, which honestly annoyed me. Of course, he'd try making it about one specific person instead of understanding this was about something much bigger. I explained Adrien had nothing to do with it, He was just a catalyst that helped me realize how much I'd been missing by limiting myself to one person. Over the next few weeks, we had multiple conversations about it. Curtis kept asking practical questions, whether it would just be physical, what boundaries we'd have, how we'd handle jealousy. Questions that showed he was trying to understand, even if he clearly wasn't enthusiastic. I appreciated that he was engaging instead of just shutting it down immediately, but I could tell he was hoping I'd change my mind, or that it was just a phase. He kept suggesting alternatives: couples therapy, more date nights, planning another trip. Like our problems could be solved by tweaking around the edges instead of addressing the fundamental issue. It was frustrating because he still wasn't really hearing what I was telling him. The more we talked, the more I realized how essential this was for me. I'd spent years suppressing this part of myself, trying to fit Curtis's idea of what a wife should be, and I was exhausted. I needed freedom to explore connections with other people, to feel desired and interesting and alive in ways that weren't happening in our marriage anymore. Curtis kept saying he needed time to think, which I understood but also found irritating. How much time did he need? We'd been having versions of this conversation for years. At some point, wasn't he going to decide whether he could accept this or not? I was being patient, but I wasn't going to wait forever for him to figure out if he could handle being married to the real me. I started explaining this wasn't about our sex life or anything being wrong with him specifically. This was about my identity and how I needed to express my sexuality. I'd always been someone who thrived on variety and new experiences, and trying to suppress that for traditional marriage expectations was slowly killing something essential in me. The conversations became more tense as Curtis realized I wasn't going to drop the subject. He started getting defensive, asking why our relationship wasn't enough for me, whether I'd ever really been satisfied with just him. Those questions felt like attacks, like he was trying to make me feel guilty for being honest instead of trying to understand. Eventually, I had to be completely honest. I told him this wasn't really a negotiation. This was me explaining what I needed to stay in our marriage. I could try suppressing it longer, but ultimately, I'd end up resenting him and our relationship if I couldn't express this part of myself. I was giving him the opportunity to be part of the solution instead of becoming part of the problem. That's when everything started falling apart. Instead of appreciating my honesty, Curtis became completely unreasonable. He accused me of giving ultimatums, which wasn't fair. I was simply being clear about my needs and giving him information to make informed decisions about our future. If anyone was giving ultimatums, it was him, basically saying I had to choose between being myself and staying married. The fights got worse and more frequent. Curtis would bring up the conversation at random times, asking the same questions over and over like he hoped for different answers. He wanted to know if I'd already met someone, if I'd been thinking about this because I was unhappy with him specifically, whether I'd been faithful during our marriage. The interrogation was exhausting. What really pissed me off was how he started acting like I was asking for something completely outrageous. Like wanting to explore other connections was this bizarre concept instead of something plenty of modern couples navigate successfully. He kept saying things like, "Normal people don't need this," and "most wives would be happy with what we have," which felt insulting and dismissive. Curtis also got weird about my friendships and work relationships. He'd ask pointed questions about conversations with male colleagues, or make passive-aggressive comments about plans with friends. Like, since I wanted an open relationship, every interaction with other men was somehow suspicious. The jealousy and paranoia were suffocating. The worst part was how Curtis started involving other people in our private business. He called his sister to complain, and suddenly I'm getting concerned phone calls about how marriages require sacrifice and compromise. Like I was selfish for being honest about my needs instead of quietly suffering in silence. His family started treating me differently too, with subtle disapproval that was obvious even when they tried being polite. Family dinners became uncomfortable, with everyone walking on eggshells and shooting meaningful looks. It was humiliating, knowing they were discussing my personal life and judging me for wanting something different than what they considered acceptable. Eventually, Curtis started threatening divorce if I didn't drop the subject completely. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who didn't respect the institution of marriage, which was such bullshit. I respected marriage enough to be honest about what I needed, instead of cheating or lying or slowly growing to hate my husband. When I realized he was never going to come around, I had to make a choice. I could either suppress this essential part of myself for the rest of my life and slowly grow to resent both him and our marriage, or I could stand up for what I needed and accept the consequences. It wasn't really a choice. I knew I couldn't go back to pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to make Curtis comfortable. The final conversation happened on a Tuesday night in February. Curtis had been giving me silent treatment for 3 days after our latest fight, and I was exhausted from the constant tension. When he finally started talking again, it was to deliver what felt like a prepared speech about how he couldn't continue living this way and how my demands were destroying our marriage. He told me that if opening our relationship was so important, maybe we should consider ending our marriage instead. He said it like he was calling my bluff, expecting me to immediately backtrack and promise never to bring it up again. The look on his face when I said, maybe we should, was almost comical. Pure shock that I wasn't going to beg him to reconsider. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, which was ironic considering it was basically us agreeing to get divorced. Curtis admitted he'd never understood what I was asking for and couldn't imagine being okay with his wife sleeping with other men. I told him I couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life pretending to be satisfied with something that felt like emotional death. The divorce process was thankfully quick, since we didn't have kids and could agree on most major decisions. Curtis wanted out as badly as I did, and neither of us was interested in dragging things out with lawyers and court battles. We split assets fairly evenly, sold the house, and went our separate ways with minimal drama. But Curtis couldn't resist getting in final shots during the paperwork process. He made sure to tell our lawyer exactly why we were getting divorced, painting me as someone who'd blindsided him with demands after years of happy monogamy. He conveniently left out all the conversations where I'd tried discussing these issues, making it sound like I'd just woken up one day and decided to destroy our marriage for fun. Within weeks of our divorce being finalized, Curtis started dating someone new. Some elementary school teacher he met through a mutual friend. Exactly the kind of sweet, traditional woman who would never challenge him or ask for anything beyond the standard relationship template. She seemed perfectly content to be his devoted girlfriend, posting cutesy couple photos and gushing about how lucky she was. Seeing them together was surreal, especially when mutual friends would update me on how happy and normal their relationship was. Like Curtis had finally found someone who appreciated him properly, unlike his selfish ex-wife who'd wanted too much. It was obvious he was using this new relationship to prove something, that he was perfectly capable of having successful partnership with someone who didn't make unreasonable demands. What nobody seemed to understand was that I wasn't jealous of his new girlfriend or regretful about my choices. If anything, seeing Curtis with someone content with the basic relationship package just confirmed we'd been fundamentally incompatible. He needed someone satisfied with routine and predictability, and I needed freedom to explore what else life had to offer. 2 years after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Curtis at a grocery store. He was there with his girlfriend, looking exactly like the settled suburban couple we'd never quite managed to be. They seemed comfortable together in a way that was both familiar and foreign. The kind of easy contentment that comes from both people wanting exactly the same thing from life. Curtis introduced me to his girlfriend with careful politeness, and I could see her sizing me up, probably wondering what kind of woman would throw away a marriage to someone like him. She was pleasant enough, but there was this subtle protective energy that made it clear she saw me as some cautionary tale about what happens when wives get too demanding. The whole interaction lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it crystallized something for me about the choices we'd both made. Curtis had found someone who would never challenge him to grow or change or consider alternative ways of living. Meanwhile, I was still figuring out what I actually wanted from life. But at least I was being honest about the process, instead of settling for something that felt like slow death. Looking back now, I don't regret pushing for what I needed, even though it cost me my marriage. I'd rather be divorced and authentic than married and slowly dying inside. Curtis got his traditional relationship with someone who shares his vision of what love should look like, and I got my freedom to explore what else might be possible. In the end, maybe that was the best outcome for both of us, even if nobody else saw it that way.